They called it Rapid Death, Racing Demon, and for good reason. The Yamaha RD 350 was small, loud, and devastatingly fast, an outlaw disguised as a street bike. But the real story is far darker. Watch until the end because the twist will change how you see motorcycle history forever. Racing roots. In the late 1960s, Yamaha was not yet the powerhouse of motorcycle culture that we remember today. It was ambitious, determined, and hungry to prove itself against the giants of Europe and America. On racetracks across the globe, Yamaha was beginning to collect victories that stunned competitors and thrilled fans. The company had unlocked the explosive potential of the two-stroke engine, a design that produced far more power for its size than any conventional four-stroke. Yet Yamaha faced a decision. Should this technology remain confined to their championship machines, reserved only for factory riders in leathers, or could it be transformed into something that ordinary people could experience on the street? The answer was bold. Yamaha decided to pour its racetrack secrets directly into the motorcycles it sold to the public. This meant that instead of offering dull commuter bikes or watered-down touring machines, Yamaha presented riders with true descendants of its Grand Prix champions. For the first time, the man on the street could swing his leg over a machine that carried racing DNA in every bolt. This philosophy was no marketing gimmick. It was a revolution, an invitation to live out the dream of speed and competition without ever leaving the public road. What came after this bold decision was an engineering surprise that left competitors scrambling to keep up. Engineering shock. How could 347 cubic centimeters unleash such terror? The Yamaha RD 350 was not a massive machine. On paper it looked modest, even manageable, but the details revealed why it earned a reputation for shocking performance. At its heart was a two-stroke parallel twin that revved high and produced an exhilarating surge of power that few riders were prepared for. Unlike many two-strokes of the past, it was equipped with reed valve induction that smoothed power delivery, making the bike more responsive in everyday riding while still delivering a ferocious hit when the revs soared. The engineers added Yamaha's Auto-Lube system, a clever innovation that automatically mixed oil with fuel, freeing riders from messy premixing and ensuring reliability even at high performance. A 6-speed gearbox allowed the engine to sing in its sweet spot, while a front disc brake, rare in the early 1970s, gave the RD 350 a stopping advantage its rivals could not match. The result was a motorcycle that weighed little more than a lightweight commuter, but produced acceleration that embarrassed larger four-strokes. When you twisted the throttle, the bike came alive like a caged animal suddenly freed. It was not just speed, it was the sensation of raw, unfiltered energy delivered directly to your body. For riders accustomed to sluggish, heavy machines, the RD 350 felt like a lightning bolt made of steel and gasoline. One rider in London recalled his first test ride. The front wheel lifted skyward as he shifted into second, and he staggered back into the dealership pale, whispering, "Rapid death indeed." That lightning-fast design didn't just stay in the workshop, it exploded into the lives of young riders hungry for freedom. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that like button. It tells us to keep bringing you the untold truths of motorcycling. And drop a comment below. Did you know about the RD 350's hidden engineering edge, or is this your first time hearing the legend? Cultural explosion. Why did the RD 350 become the motorcycle parents feared most? The early 1970s were a time of upheaval and change. Young riders were hungry for freedom, identity, and a machine that could match their restless spirit. The Yamaha RD 350 arrived as if designed precisely for them. Affordable enough for students and young workers, light enough for first-time riders, yet powerful enough to chase down much bigger machines, it became an instant ticket to rebellion. On city streets, the RD 350 darted through traffic with agility that astonished onlookers. On back roads, it became the weapon of choice for impromptu races. Riders discovered that for the price of an ordinary commuter bike, they could own a machine that felt like a miniature Grand Prix racer. For parents, this was terrifying. The RD 350 earned whispered nicknames: Rapid Death, Racing Demon, or simply that dangerous Yamaha. For riders, those nicknames only fueled the thrill. Every rev, every late-night duel, every daring sprint against larger motorcycles turned the RD 350 into more than transport. It was a symbol of speed, defiance, and youth itself. A college student in California admitted he kept a spare muffler in his garage, one for daytime commuting, another louder pipe he swapped on at night for backroad races. His parents never knew. Magazines celebrated it, rival manufacturers scrambled to respond, and in coffee shops and garages across the world, stories about its explosive acceleration grew into legend. The motorcycle had transcended its mechanical form. It was now a cultural phenomenon. Yet even as its legend grew louder, murmurs of discontent hinted that trouble was brewing in the shadows. Legends like the RD 350 remind us that performance without protection is a gamble. That's why we've linked essential rider gear, tools, and accessories. Grab them below before your next ride. The shadow appears. But what if all that power carried a hidden price? For all its brilliance, the RD 350 was a two-stroke, and that meant it carried traits impossible to hide. With every twist of the throttle came not just speed, but a blue haze of smoke that lingered in the air. The exhaust note, thrilling to riders, was harsh and irritating to neighbors. City streets echoed with its sharp crackle, and highways filled with its pungent fumes. What riders celebrated as raw energy, others condemned as antisocial noise and unnecessary pollution. Environmental awareness was beginning to rise in the early 1970s. Governments were drafting laws on air quality, noise reduction, and public safety. The RD 350, with its intoxicating performance, also became a target in this new climate. Regulators whispered about emission standards. Politicians spoke about cracking down on loud, smoky machines. Engineers at Yamaha began to realize that the future of their masterpiece might not be decided by racers or riders, but by bureaucrats with pens. The storm clouds were gathering. Riders still raced through the night, hearts pounding with adrenaline, but behind the scenes, the RD 350's destiny was shifting. It was no longer a question of performance. It was a question of survival. Those shadows would soon solidify into laws, rules, and battles that no throttle could outrun. The noise problem. This roaring twin didn't just thrill riders, it infuriated regulators. By the mid-1970s, the Yamaha RD 350 had already made its name as the champion of youthful rebellion, but its very strengths were quickly turning into liabilities. The sharp crackle of its exhaust was music to its riders, but a nightmare to anyone living in the suburbs or crowded cities where these machines roared through at midnight. With every hard acceleration, a cloud of blue smoke filled the air, a byproduct of the two-stroke engine's thirst for oil mixed with fuel. To enthusiasts, that smell was intoxicating. To neighbors, parents, and lawmakers, it was choking proof that motorcycles were polluting machines out of step with a changing world. Noise complaints began to pile up. Environmental groups, empowered by a growing global awareness of air quality, started pointing fingers at two-stroke engines. The RD 350 was not alone, but it became the most visible target because of its popularity and reputation. When politicians needed an example of noisy, dirty transportation, they often found the RD 350 parked at the curb. Suddenly, the bike that symbolized freedom and power was being rebranded in newspapers and committee hearings as an environmental nuisance. Once the public grew restless, politicians wasted no time in sharpening their pens into weapons. The wall of regulation. Could bureaucracy kill a legend faster than any rival on the road? In the United States, the newly established Environmental Protection Agency began to crack down on vehicle emissions. Across Europe, governments debated noise ordinances and stricter pollution standards. Japan, Yamaha's own home market, was not immune either, with ministries studying how to bring its booming motorcycle culture under tighter control. For the RD 350, these forces were devastating. Two-stroke engines, by their very nature, released more unburned fuel and produced more smoke than four-strokes. No matter how thrilling the performance, regulators saw them as outdated polluters. Suddenly, Yamaha was not fighting Suzuki or Kawasaki on the racetrack. It was fighting a wall of paperwork, rules, and regulations that threatened to outlaw its most popular product. Each new law chipped away at what made the RD 350 great. Tighter noise limits demanded mufflers that strangled the engine's voice. Stricter emissions targets forced engineers to cut performance. The very character of the bike, its violent rush of power, its sharp exhaust crackle, was being legislated out of existence. For young riders, this was an insult. They saw governments attacking their culture under the guise of environmental protection. For Yamaha, it was a survival crisis. Would the company accept defeat and watch the RD 350 vanish, or could it fight back with technology? Faced with this bureaucratic wall, Yamaha prepared a daring counterattack through innovation. Reinvention, RD 350 LC. What if Yamaha refused to surrender? In 1980, Yamaha unveiled the RD 350 LC, a radical reimagining of the iconic machine. The letters LC stood for liquid-cooled, and this was no cosmetic change. By surrounding the engine in a water jacket and radiator, Yamaha was able to tame some of the noise and emissions while squeezing even more performance out of the two-stroke design. The RD 350 LC was cleaner, faster, and in many ways more refined, but it still carried the wild heart of its predecessor. Even more significant was the introduction of Yamaha's power valve system, or YPVS. This clever mechanism adjusted the exhaust port timing to broaden the power band, making the bike more flexible at low revs while still delivering the explosive kick at higher speeds. Riders who had struggled with the sudden, violent rush of the older RD 350 found the LC smoother, more manageable, yet just as exhilarating. The Reinvention was a statement. Yamaha was telling the world that it would not simply abandon the two-stroke legacy. Instead, it would innovate its way past the regulators, blending compliance with excitement. For a moment, it looked as if the strategy might succeed. The LC earned praise from the press, admiration from riders, and grudging respect even from those who had doubted the future of two-strokes. Even so, the march of regulation proved relentless, closing in on the king of the streets. Collapse of a king. But what happens when innovation still isn't enough? Despite Yamaha's best efforts, the RD 350 could not outrun the political and environmental shifts that defined the early 1980s. In the United States, emissions laws became so strict that the bike could no longer be sold in its most potent forms. Europe followed with increasingly harsh restrictions, and even in markets where regulation lagged, consumer tastes were changing. Four-stroke engines were smoother, quieter, and increasingly marketed as the responsible choice for the new decade. The RD 350 LC, for all its brilliance, was caught between two worlds. Enthusiasts adored it, but governments distrusted it. Dealers struggled to sell it in regions where legal compliance meant reduced performance. And slowly, production numbers declined. By the mid-1980s, the RD series was no longer the spearhead of Yamaha's lineup, but a fading reminder of a rebellious past. For the riders who had lived through its glory days, the decline felt like a betrayal. The king of the streets had been forced into exile, not by rival motorcycles, but by the steady pressure of rules and regulations. Yamaha shifted its focus to four-stroke sport bikes, chasing a future that would be cleaner and more politically acceptable. The RD 350, once the embodiment of freedom, had been transformed into an outlaw, an icon remembered more for what it represented than for what it could still be. Yet while official markets pushed it aside in garages and alleys, the RD's second life was just beginning. The Outlaw Machine. What happens when governments outlaw your dream? By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the Yamaha RD 350 was disappearing from major markets under the pressure of regulations, but its disappearance only made riders want it more. In many countries, the bike became a symbol of rebellion precisely because it was frowned upon by authorities. Young enthusiasts scoured classifieds and back-alley garages for used examples, refusing to surrender to the quieter, heavier four-strokes that manufacturers were now pushing. The RD 350's outlaw image grew stronger as riders formed underground networks to trade parts, modify exhausts, and keep the smoky twins alive. In the eyes of governments, these machines were a nuisance. In the eyes of riders, they were forbidden fruit, proof that freedom on two wheels was still possible, even in an era of tightening control. Some owners even bragged about sneaking past noise checkpoints or riding at dawn to avoid police patrols. The more regulators tried to erase the RD 350 from the streets, the more it became a badge of defiance. To ride one was to declare that you were unwilling to accept compromise, unwilling to trade adrenaline for compliance. The RD 350 had become an outlaw machine admired as much for its defiance of authority as for its sheer speed. In Madrid, a group of friends stripped their RDs of lights and mirrors every weekend, racing them through mountain passes, then rebolting the street gear on Monday morning to fool police. Far away from Western restrictions, another country was about to embrace the machine like no other. India's love affair. How did a bike banned in America find immortality in India? In 1983, Yamaha struck a partnership with India's Escorts Group to produce a local version of the RD 350. Branded as the Rajdoot 350, it brought the same screaming two-stroke twin to a country where motorcycles were often utilitarian machines for daily commuting. For Indian riders, this was nothing short of revolutionary. Suddenly, a bike that had been banned or crippled in other markets became available to a whole new audience, eager for speed and prestige. The Rajdoot 350 was expensive by local standards, but that only increased its aura of exclusivity. Young professionals and thrill seekers bought it to stand out in traffic jams dominated by small commuter bikes. Its acceleration was unlike anything the average Indian rider had ever experienced. On highways, it was a king. In cities, it was a legend in the making. Soon, entire communities of enthusiasts formed around it, trading stories and modifications just as riders in America and Europe once had. Even today, the Rajdoot 350 holds a mythical place in Indian motorcycling culture. Collectors restore them, riders gather for vintage rallies, and younger enthusiasts dream of finding one tucked away in a barn. What the West had lost, India embraced. The RD 350's DNA, under the Rajdoot badge, had found a second home where its spirit would burn for decades. Meanwhile, Yamaha itself wasn't ready to let the flame die, experimenting with new successors, the Evolutionary Ghosts. What if the legend refused to die? Though the RD 350 was disappearing in some markets, Yamaha refused to abandon the concept entirely. The company launched successors like the RD 350 LC and later the RZ 350, keeping the two-stroke alive with fresh technology. The YPVS system made the power delivery broader, while liquid cooling kept engines efficient and somewhat more compliant with regulations. To riders, these new models felt like refined descendants, less raw but still thrilling. In racing too, the RD's bloodline survived. Club racers and privateers adored these machines for their lightweight and tunability. Even when regulations limited what Yamaha could sell, the bikes continued to dominate track days and local championships. To own an RZ 350 or LC model was to carry a piece of the RD legacy into the modern era. Still, many riders admitted something intangible had changed. The rawness of the original RD 350, its shocking violence of acceleration, and its reputation as a street outlaw could not be perfectly reproduced. Successors were better engineered, but they were ghosts, echoes of a spirit that regulators had tried to kill but could never fully erase. These evolutionary ghosts ensured the RD story would never completely fade. For all the efforts to keep the legacy alive, the bill for that passion was becoming impossible to ignore. The real cost. But every rush of adrenaline carries a hidden bill. For all the joy it brought, the RD 350 also left behind a trail of consequences. Economically, two-strokes demanded constant maintenance. Spark plugs fouled, pistons wore quickly, and riders often spent as much time in garages as on the road. Part shortages made things worse as production wound down, forcing enthusiasts to pay high prices for second-hand components. What had once been an affordable thrill became a costly hobby for the faithful few who refused to give up. Environmentally, the price was even higher. Two-strokes were notoriously dirty, wasting fuel and spewing hydrocarbons into the air. As cities grew more polluted, it became impossible to defend them in the face of environmental science. The very sound and smoke that made them thrilling also made them unacceptable to governments trying to clean their skies. And for accessibility, the decline of the RD 350 meant something crucial was lost. The average young rider could no longer walk into a dealership and buy a bike that delivered true racing thrills for a modest price. Instead, motorcycling tilted toward expensive four-strokes, safer and cleaner but also out of reach for many. The RD 350 had represented freedom and equality of access to speed. Its disappearance meant a world where adrenaline was now gated by wealth. Those costs reshaped not only Yamaha's lineup, but the entire motorcycle world for decades to come. The death of two-strokes. Did one motorcycle accelerate the death of an entire engine class? By the early 1980s, the Yamaha RD 350 stood as both a triumph and a warning. Its blazing popularity had made governments pay closer attention to two-stroke engines, and once regulators began tightening the noose, the fate of the entire class was sealed. The very bike that had once been hailed as revolutionary now symbolized an era that could not continue. With every new emission law and every decibel limit, the motorcycle industry shifted away from two-strokes and toward the four-stroke machines that were smoother, quieter, and politically safer. The shift was gradual, but the RD 350's decline signaled the Smoky Twins' end. Honda doubled down on four-strokes, branding them modern and responsible. Kawasaki and Suzuki pivoted too, realizing regulators saw two-strokes as obsolete. The RD 350 showcased their brilliance, yet simultaneously revealed their flaws, sealing the engine's fate. For Yamaha, the loss was bittersweet. The RD line had established its reputation as a builder of performance bikes, but now that reputation had to be carried forward on four-stroke machines. The shift was irreversible. The era of the RD 350 was ending, but the questions it raised about performance, freedom, and regulation were only just beginning. Once the industry pivoted, the battleground shifted from factories to parliaments and courtrooms. Politics on two wheels. When factories fought lawmakers, who really won? The death of the RD 350 was not merely a technical matter, it was political. Governments argued they were protecting the public interest, ensuring cleaner air and quieter streets. Manufacturers, meanwhile, lobbied furiously to delay or soften the regulations that would erase their best-selling machines. The RD 350 sat at the center of this conflict, a symbol wielded by both sides. Regulators pointed to its smoke and noise as proof of the need for strict standards. Riders and manufacturers pointed to its accessibility and excitement as proof that regulation was strangling freedom. Lobbyists battled in committees while magazines waged war in print. In the United States, journalists warned new Environmental Protection Agency rules threatened riding's joy. European industry groups argued strict laws harmed competitiveness against Japanese imports. Yamaha experimented with restrictive exhausts and catalytic converters, yet these fixes could not heal. In the end, governments prevailed. The cultural tide was shifting toward environmental responsibility, and politicians found more votes in clean air than in smoky freedom. Manufacturers conceded defeat and reoriented their lineups around four strokes. The battle had been fought, and the outcome was clear, but the cost of that victory was profound. An entire culture of riding would never be the same again. While governments claimed victory, riders themselves were left to wrestle with what had been lost. Riders in transition. What happens to a culture when its wildest icon is tamed? For riders who came of age in the 1970s, the RD 350 represented everything exhilarating about motorcycling. It was light, fast, unpredictable, and unashamedly wild. When regulators forced it off the streets, those same riders found themselves facing an identity crisis. The four strokes that replaced the RD 350 were technically impressive, but emotionally muted. They delivered smoother power, longer service intervals, and cleaner emissions, but they lacked the feral surge that had defined a generation. A rider in Germany sold his RD reluctantly, trading it for a four-stroke Honda. Years later, he confessed he kept the Yamaha's ignition key on his keyring because no bike ever felt the same. Motorcycling culture fractured. Some riders abandoned the scene, mourning lost two-strokes. Others accepted new four-strokes, but secretly missed past chaos. A devoted minority clung to their RDs, preserving them in garages, sneaking them onto streets, and passing them down as heirlooms, keeping the rebellious spirit alive despite regulation's grip. The cultural divide was stark. Motorcycling had once been defined by its rebellious image, and the RD 350 embodied that defiance. Now the image shifted toward responsibility, efficiency, and respectability. For some, this felt like progress. For others, it felt like betrayal. The soul of motorcycling was being rewritten by laws, and riders had to decide whether they would accept the new identity or fight to preserve the old one. Out of that cultural fracture rose a legend that refused to fade quietly into history. Before we reveal the final twist of this story, take a moment to subscribe. Every week we uncover the secrets, legends, and shocks that shaped riding. If the RD 350's ghost still fascinates you, subscribing ensures you never miss the next revelation waiting on the road ahead. Join us before the story continues. The Eternal Spirit. But what if the White Death never really died? Even decades after the last RD 350 rolled off the production line, its legacy remains alive. Enthusiasts restore them, collectors prize them, and younger riders still dream of finding one tucked away in a dusty garage. At vintage races, the distinctive crackle of a two-stroke RD still draws crowds, reminding everyone of a time when motorcycles felt raw and untamed. The nickname White Death, once a warning, has transformed into a badge of honor. The RD 350's DNA lives on in Yamaha's modern R-Series sport bikes, like the R1 and R6, which carry its philosophy of lightweight, razor handling, and racetrack performance. Even electric motorcycle designers aim to capture the immediacy and explosive thrill that once defined Yamaha's iconic two-stroke. The RD 350 was more than a motorcycle. It was a cultural event, a political flashpoint, and a technological marvel that forced the entire industry to change course. Though the era of two-strokes has passed, the RD 350's influence remains woven into the fabric of motorcycling. Every time a rider seeks a machine that feels untamed, every time an engineer tries to build a bike that thrills as much as it transports, the ghost of the RD 350 rides again. And that ghost reminds us that legends never die. They simply evolve into new forms, forever haunting the road ahead. The Yamaha RD 350 may be gone from showrooms, but its roar still echoes through time and through this channel. If this ride into history gripped you, don't just let it end here. Smash that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us what legends you want uncovered next. Most importantly, hit subscribe and ring the bell, because every week we bring you stories that change the way you see motorcycles forever. Miss one and you'll miss a piece of riding's untamed spirit. Stay with us. The next legend is already waiting.